Well, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here and share with you folks some things I've been thinking about for quite a long time. I'm going to kind of introduce this section. We have 6 different topics that we're going to talk to today, and we're each assigned a period of time for each topic. Now, for the first topic, we're all assigned 1 minute. I've already used up 10 of my seconds. It turns out that we have 1 minute, and then we'll trade off, and you'll hear around that topic from each of the 3 of us. But there are 6 topics that we'll work through. Now, I need to say one other thing relative to my presentation material. I'm going to read to you some quotations, okay? Because I don't believe you can read the slides and listen to me talk at the same time, okay? You're either going to read or you're going to listen. It's pretty hard to do both at the same time, particularly if you have to think, which you're talking about something you never thought about before. So I'm going to read some quotations for you. So some people get frustrated with me. This guy reads the transparency, but any word you see on the transparency, you're going to hear that word as well, okay? So you don't have to make notes or anything, but I'm just explaining what my approach to the work is. Now I've blown out already a minute, but technically my minute should start now. These guys will hold me to it, I'm sure. But in any case, the first topic is what true business agility is. And a quote that I will read, the quote comes from Peter Drucker in a periodical. The date was 1998. I give you the reference on where the quote comes from. Actually, I put the date on there too. The date is somewhat irrelevant. The date tells you, where you find the reference if you want to. But that's just the date where some fundamental truth is either uncovered or articulated. In fact, I call my material, when I speak to this material, I call it enterprise physics. Because I think this is physics. There's nothing happening by accident, okay? So I think it's physics, and we're talking about laws of nature, basically. So when I read a quote, this is from 1968, some people say, well, that's old data. Well, I'll tell you, it's not old data if you're talking about a fundamental truth. Like people, I use the illustration. How do you feel about the periodic table? That's about 150 years old. It's old data. There's nothing wrong with the periodic table, I can tell you. Okay, so in any case, I'm going to read this quote to you. The next information revolution is well underway, but it is not happening where information scientists, information executives, and the information industry in general are looking for it. It is not a revolution in technology, machinery, techniques, software, or speed. It is a revolution in concepts. And I use the word paradigm. It's a different paradigm, basically. Now Drucker, in this article, basically wrote, he talked about this is not the first information revolution. This is the 4th information revolution. The first one was papyrus, recording of some data. That was large bodies of data, scrolls in effect, books. And the next one was the printing press, Gutenberg printing press, and now we have the 4th information revolution. Drucker observes in the article, historical patterns for the 4th pattern for the revolution show that it is not the technology itself that will realize the revolution. It is the owner and beneficiary of the content. That is, in our case, it is the business. This revolution has to do with the business. It's not a technical revolution, it's a business revolution. The question is not whether the revolution is happening or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it, basically? And that is what the manifesto is all about. What are you going to do about it? Here's what the manifesto is, our compilation of all the issues that we can identify that have to be evaluated as you're going to try to deal with the revolution. Now, all of that is a context for me to read to you my business agility definition. True business agility is the ability to modify dynamically the concepts and structures of the business itself for maintaining relevance in the context of a dynamically changing, complex, and uncertain operational environment. That would be true business agility. That's my definition. Now in 3 minutes and 22 seconds, I owe these guys 2 minutes and 24 seconds now. I'm sure they will extract the time from me at some point in time during this week. So with that, I want to turn it over to Roger Burlton, who will pick up his definition of true business agility.
Thank you, John. I know we'll never catch up, but it's okay. So it's going to be my pleasure just to give you my perspective on all this. And part of my perspective on this is that we are living in this ever-changing world that we cannot do anything about. It's happening all around us. And this is an old way of looking at things. We just call it steeple, like sociologically what's happening, technologically what's happening, environmentally what's happening, economically what's happening, politically what's happening, legally what's happening. These things are happening all around us. And our businesses have no choice except to work in the environment that's happening. You can try to influence it, but you cannot change the fact that the millennials will be the majority of the workforce in the next few years. It's just a given. But however, all of those are going to put pressure on our organizations. But these changes happening on our outside world, in our ecosystem, so to speak, are there, and we have to recognize it. And quite often what we find is organizations play in the old view of like what from 20 years ago. They're actually playing in the steeple from 20 years ago and not looking at the one that's happening today. So we really have to accept that. So the rationale for this whole issue, this is why we have to invest in agility and not just invest in capability. Because the capability will be short-lived unless we invest in agility, the ability to consistently, constantly change. And as we're doing this, we cannot risk the existing value creation. So while we're changing, we have to be successful in what we're doing as we're changing. We can't just take everything, throw it all away, and then build something new for 3 years down the road. We have to survive the transition as we're going that way. And of course, one of the major things to be able to do this is we have to understand what is the impact of the changes we're making. Because quite often, and one of my favorite expressions is, the main cause of problems is solutions. I think we all recognize that we create our own future problems in doing that. And so the challenge in all of this is that we have this little model. And by the way, we all have our own little 2x2 matrix, right? Otherwise, you're not a consultant if you don't have a 2x2 matrix. And one of my clients told me that. He just said, I'd just like to know what your one is. So this is my one. But what this really says here is we have a number of products and services which are going to be stable or dynamic. And we also have capabilities and processes and technologies which can be stable or can be dynamic. And historically what we did is we invented a business, we threw it over to here, where the product and service lasted a long time and our capabilities lasted a long time and our systems executed that way for a long, long time. But given that previous slide I showed you, all of that's changing dramatically. So I think our challenge these days is to basically try to play here, because we have to have dynamic products and services, but stable capabilities if we can. What that means, as John said, is design for change, design for ease of change. Build component parts which are stable, separate those from the ones which are variable, and then work off the variable ones every time, rather than scrap and rework every single time. Our challenge is to play here. For me, this is business agility. I can actually change products and services without ripping apart the whole organization, ripping apart our technology stack, ripping apart everything that we have every single time. Yeah, I did the same thing. So, Ron, you owe us a lot of time now.
So, business agility, I've given you some really good thoughts about what business agility is, but business agility isn't a thing. Business agility is it's a goal, it's an end goal, it's a destination. Or you could say it's a characteristic of a business or a business capability that has been built for rapid change. And it's simply the ability for the business to change quickly. Now, that doesn't happen by magic. It has to be engineered. So you'll hear us talk a lot today about the engineering of agility. And what you build has to be scalable, it has to be sustainable, it has to be built for future change. Unfortunately today, many companies have built their infrastructure for rapid software development, not for rapid business change. And that's a huge problem. So consequently, we're not agile when we need to roll out new policies, new business rules, new procedures, new policies, new processes. That's just not going to do in the knowledge age. The knowledge age requires us to think differently about the core infrastructure that we need to organize. So what we're going to suggest today is that knowledge, business knowledge, is the key to engineering the business more effectively for agility. And you have to identify policies that are not working and be ready and quickly bust those policies, bust them up, change them when things are not working. So today, in short, we're here to facilitate a fresh and hopefully innovative rethink of engineering business knowledge.
Okay, the next subject topic that we'll talk to is the grounding of the manifesto in management imperatives. And I want to set a context again. The revolution, I already made the case, is about the business. The revolution is not a technical issue, it's a business issue. And all three of us come from completely different domains of interest. I spent most of my professional life focused around the areas of enterprise architecture. I probably started around 1975, as well as I can pin down the date. I've known Ron Ross. I probably met him early on, about 1980. He comes from the data or business rules domain. I probably met him around 1980. I met Roger probably about 1985. And he has been focused on business process renewal, value chain, those kinds of issues. So we have decades of focus on each of our separate domains of interest. And what is common to all of us, basically, is complexity and change. If you have to deal with complexity and change, you are going to formalize the data, the business rules, you are going to formalize the process to value chain, and you are going to formalize the architecture. There's no other way to deal with it, and change and complexity are business. Those are business issues. Okay, so it's the business that is the kind of focal point for the three of us. Now, we've spent decades. I don't know. I got about 45 years of thinking about this, and Ron has probably 35 or 40, and Roger 30 or 35. So we have a lot of years of thinking about these kinds of things. So we began to deal with the Business Agility Manifesto by identifying all the risks that an enterprise will have to accommodate when they begin to make the major changes to the paradigm, the basic concept of enterprise, the basic concept of business. So we identified all the risks that we could think of, and then we categorized those into 10 categories. The categories are what we call the management imperatives. And facilitate business change is one of management imperatives. To create value is another business management imperative. Another, implement business strategy. And there's 10 of these. And in the manifesto itself, you'll find the imperatives and the detail for how we classified the detail into those 10 categories. And all in the manifesto are traceable right back to the fundamental 10 categories of business risk that you're going to have to deal with, the management imperatives. So that's the ground, the foundation for the manifesto.
So what I'm going to talk about now is from my perspective, my background, what that really means. And the main thing I'm coming at with regard to management imperatives is really the issue of value. Organizations today are talking a lot about value for customers, value for shareholders, value for employees, but what is the value? So why? In other words, why do we do what we do? So what I'm going to basically say here is that we're trying to basically change the business in minimum time, with minimum cost, with minimum risk, with minimum disruption we possibly can. And of course, minimizing the risk of failure. We see so many, all around the world, we see so many major change initiatives just go really badly. And it costs a lot of money. I work with a large Dutch bank who spent 100 million euros in 3 years trying to put this whole new capability in place. And the issue was not the 100 million euros, it was the lost 3 years in market. where it cost them billions because they didn't have the capability to be there. So, I mean, this is a very, very tricky situation. There's a lot in this diagram, there's a lot of things happening, a lot of things are changing. You pull on one, something else moves over here when you touch something over here. And quite often, we don't know what the consequences are of what we're doing. That's going to be our challenge. So really what I'm trying to say is that it's all about value creation. And if you're going to create value, you have to look at the value chain, not just look at how the organizational structure works. So one of the big implications of this is on the org chart. And the last thing we should be doing is reorganizing and then looking at what we should be doing. The last thing to do is organize. Organize it around the value that has to be created from beginning to end from a customer point of view.
We all know that technology is happening, is improving, is breakthrough capabilities. It's happening at a breakneck speed. We can barely keep up with it all. We have AI and bots, we have self-driving cars, we've got blockchain and distributed ledgers. Just very hard to stay on top of it all. And the question is, are our lives going to change a lot because of all these technological innovations? And the answer is yes, of course, it's going to change a lot. But is everything going to change? And the answer to that question, I think, is no. Not everything is going to change. Some things will stay the same. For example, there will still be organizations, there will still be corporations, there will still be assets that the corporations and the organizations have to manage, and there will still be executive management. Now, it may not look like today's structures of management, but executive management will still be a factor. So our thinking is that anything you say about business agility and about aligning capabilities in the future with your need to operate effectively has to be aligned with the fundamental needs of executive management and the need to protect, enhance, and evolve your assets. Otherwise, you're just kidding yourself. You're just dealing with surface effects. So we wanted a deep grounding for the manifesto, something that we could ensure authenticity of the principles that we were creating. And so the management imperatives that John and Roger have talked about is our grounding. And we use that grounding to develop the principles of business agility. Now, you can argue with our principles if you like, and hopefully today we'll have a good discussion and interaction about some of those principles and ideas. We're not saying we have all the answers, but frankly, first, if you want to contend with the principles, you're going to have to argue with the management imperatives. And you can try to do that, but frankly, we think they're very solid and they're unassailable. So in any case, if you want to discuss and argue and dispute, management imperatives are where you need to start.
The next topic we'll take up is the topic of the challenges to the organizations today. And typically when I talk about the environment, what kind of an environment do we have to live in these days, I start with the Toffler material. Alvin Toffler was a sociological prognosticator. He was a futurist, and he's written a lot of books. And the books that I've referred to here have to do with the books that he wrote about change. And many of you probably already read these books. They're still heavily referenced in the academic domain, so these are not unfamiliar to many people. But the first book that he wrote about change was a book called Future Shock. It was a 1970 book, and in that book he basically said knowledge is change. And the ever-increasing body of knowledge feeding the great engine of technology creates ever-increasing change. And that's why you see the rate of change escalating fairly dramatically these days. And not too many people take exception to that anymore. It used to be people would be disdainful about that. But no, we're all faced with these issues of change. It's become a personal problem, not simply a corporate problem anymore. But in any case, in talking to a friend I had years ago, Roger Greer was the dean of the School of Library and Information Management at the University of Southern California, USC. I sat on his advisory council for a lot of years, and I was talking to him on the phone. He said, well, the body of knowledge in 1993 is doubling every 6 years. By 2023, it will be doubling every 6 months. A friend of mine ran across an academic from McMaster University around the Toronto area, Nick Bonas. I don't know Nick Bonas, but he had his dimensions were about the same as Roger was telling me about years before. But Nick's observation is that by 2010, I think it was 2010, the body of knowledge will be doubling every 11 hours. Okay, so this is what we're trying to deal with here, okay? We're talking about extreme change, okay? And you can see where it's going. It's going to approximate infinity, basically. Well, you change the rate of change, what's going to happen to your time to market. From the time you get an order placed, a demand placed upon the enterprise until you produce something that fulfills that order, your time to market is going to shrink. If you drive the rate of change to infinity, your time to market shrinks to 0. Okay, in fact, I don't even have to amplify that. We're living here right now. The things I'm saying, talking about right now, we're already there. The third wave, he was differentiating the major waves of humanity. You know, the agricultural wave. He talked about, you know, the characteristics of the agricultural waves are different from the characteristics of the industrial waves. It's not an extrapolation from age to age, it's a step function change. It's different, fundamentally different. I don't want to take the time to elaborate that much, but except to say the intersection between the ages, the word it's used is revolution. Fairly strong word. The implication says, tear all this stuff down, throw it away, we're going to start over again. This time we're doing it differently, okay? So you see the Industrial Revolution. Fundamentally, I mean, it's not mystical, you know, but you know, the Industrial Revolution, all of us in this room live most of our lives in the industrial age, basically. We walk around with the industrial age glasses on. We interpret everything in the context of the industrial age. You understand, the book is talking about the information age. He called it information age. We're referring to it as a knowledge age. You'll see why in a moment, but it is a different paradigm. It is a different mental model. It's a different way to think. It's affecting the characteristics, the basic concepts that we're trying to deal with from an enterprise standpoint. The third book he wrote is a book called Power Shift. And the basic idea of this book, you give everybody access to the same information at the same time, the power is going to shift outboard. No longer is it concentrated in 2 or 3 people at the top who know everything, decide everything, control everything. Forget that, the power will shift outboard. In fact, if the recipient of the product or service has access to the same information the enterprise has access to, the power will shift into the external environment. It will become market-driven. Okay, so in any case, the characteristics that you can see in terms of where we're trying to live, escalation of rate of change manifests itself as a shrinking time to market approximating 0. You see a knowledge age that's a paradigm shift that's changing the fundamental concept of what you think, the thinking patterns that you think about, and the escalation of complexity, dramatic complexity. When the customer is dominant, I didn't develop this very much, but the customer wants every customer wants a custom product. They want a product customized to their specification. And if you can't produce the product customized to their specification, click, they can get a different supplier. Okay, and every customer has a demand for a different custom product. I mean, we're talking about complexity here we haven't even dreamed about yet. So you see a dramatic escalation of complexity. So the challenge, presently, we understood the characteristics of the knowledge age today: extreme complexity, extreme change, and a new paradigm. And the paradigm is fundamental. It has to do with knowledge management. It's the knowledge age, in effect. So those are the challenges we see for the foreseeable future. So, Roger, you're up. Oh,
is this
42 seconds.
Is this a good time to tell John it wasn't a 1 minute section, it was a 5 minute section? Anyway, so what I'm going to just observe on is what's happening out there that's affecting us, whether we like to deal with it or not. And the first one of these is that your external stakeholders are not happy. Most of them would want something different. They want you to be working in a different way. And we sort of look at any organization as just this black box, where we don't look inside the box, we look just outside the box. There's a whole bunch of relationships we have to manage and manage well. Today we're finding that, yes, everybody's talking about customer, but be great for the customer, but don't meet the regulatory requirements, that's not going to work either. Be great for the regulatory agencies and the customer, but don't produce a profit for the shareholders or the owners, that's also not much fun. Be great for all of those and have your employees hate their jobs and all leave every 6 months, that's also not going to work. So these external relationships, externally oriented, is really, really critical. And the interesting thing about that is none of those external stakeholders could care less about the inside of your organization. They really, really don't want to know what your organization chart looks like. Even though I'm sure we've all been in the situation where you've had a problem and you get bounced across the org chart, and you're the only one who knows how something actually gets done, because nobody inside the organization sees it from end to end. I'm sure you've all had that feeling, right? Just deal with an airline, deal with a phone company, deal with a bank. You've all had some of those experiences. This is the reality. So it's outside in is what we're trying to do. And but really, what people do care about is the end to end. So I put something in and some miracle occurs, and I get something out of the other end. That's more of an industrial age view. In the knowledge age, there's a lot of continuing interactions all the way through. Matter of fact, you could even claim that the actual processes, like I'm a process person, the process which get all this stuff done can involve even some of the outside stakeholders. But if the company I'm dealing with has outsourced part of it over here, and a problem happens over there, quite often I've heard, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but we outsourced that. Would you like to talk to them?" No, would not like to talk to them. I'd like to talk to you. You took my money, you made the commitment. I don't care how you structure it. I want value created all the way through. And so taking this perspective is going to be a very important perspective for us. This is why a lot of people these days are starting to use tools such as customer journey mapping. Where basically you try to say, let me understand the customer. And we have an organization we know quite well in a bank in Toronto. They've mapped out 12 major scenarios for various customer types and situations, and they're nailing this down as much as they possibly can. They're out there talking to all these people to really understand what are the requirements of those people who are sitting in those outside worlds. So understanding in all of that, then basically what does the customer have to do? Why are we doing it? What do we do? What touch points and channels? How satisfied are people with it? What improvements do we need to make? It's very much an analysis of the customer view of our organization. And these types of tools are becoming quite popular. And the other thing we see in all of this is that in the manufacturing world, the industrial age, this would have been one line all the way through with the customer placing an order up here and receiving the goods over here. Now it's oops, and this is going to happen. Here we go. I'll go backwards.
You got to the good material real fast.
Yeah, very much. Would you like me to present it as well? But I think the point here is that the way it is now, the customer is involved at every step of the way. So it's a really good question, or statement. Customers are integral participants in our processes, or are we just integral participants in theirs? So we start to really change that thinking that John talked about. We are part of their process. Everything we do is part of theirs. If we don't understand their process, we will not be successful with ours, and we will not be successful with the relationships. So this becomes extremely important in doing architectural work as we go forward. So it's going to be something quite important. The challenge, though, that we're observing is now, before I didn't show you the inside of the box. Now look inside. Does anybody know what really happens in there? Does that look familiar? Now, there's a whole bunch of dots in there, and we don't know how the dots are connected. And not just activity to activity to activity to activity, but activity to rules, information. Can I connect? If I come over here and I grab one of these and I pull it, is this guy over here going to move? We don't know. And this is where the knowledge is going to be absolutely essential for us. We're going to have to get a grip on the implications of change, especially the unintended consequences that you were not aware of when you went in to make a change in the first place. So I think this is going to be part of our challenge going forward. I missed it by 5 seconds.
any one of you here, I'm sure, could do a great job of listing problems that your organization faces. My responsibility in this short segment is just to identify a whole laundry list of issues that organizations have. And what we'll get to later is that all of the solutions to all of these problems are highly interrelated. So, we're not overwhelmed, we're not hopeless, but there is a daunting list of challenges. First challenge I would identify, you probably all have, is the issue of data quality. Anybody here not have a data quality issue in your organization? Okay, I don't see any hands going up real quickly. Data quality is like a hidden monster that in our organizations consumes vast quantities of resources and prevents us on a daily basis from being more effective. It erodes our effectiveness. Can we do better on data quality? Absolutely. I'll talk about how later on. Another issue, and if this one doesn't concern you, it almost certainly should, is knowledge retention. I'm a baby boomer. Once in a while I think of retiring. I don't know if I ever will, but I think about it anyway. A lot of organizations, a significant part of their staff, is just about ready to walk out the door. And when they walk out the door, they're likely to take a lot of the knowledge with them that exists in the organization. And that's a risk, a huge risk that many organizations are facing today. Now, my personal sort of hot button is business communication and the seeming inability of people in organizations, the same organization, to talk precisely or even understandably about matters of complexity in their own organization. This is just a fundamental human communication issue. So what I'm observing here is that not only do organizations have a knowledge retention problem, they also have a knowledge communication problem. And actually, those two things are highly interrelated. And I want you to start asking yourself, what's the solution to those kind of problems? The answer is going to be it's better knowledge management. It's better explicit capture of knowledge. It's retention, it's reuse, and it's redeployment. Processes. We all know that there are problems with our business processes. I think first on my list would be rigidity, which is sort of the opposite of agile. Our processes are just too rigid. They're too difficult to change. The second one on my list there is incorrect or inconsistent business results. Now that is purely a business rule problem. If you're not applying your business rules consistently, you're going to get inconsistent results from your processes. I won't go on, but in a lot of organizations we find that these issues have been troublesome for so long, it's like we're almost numb to the fact that they're occurring. We sort of get blinded to the fact that, yeah, we could do better. One of the things that I'm going to propose today that your organization should be doing and should stand ready to do almost every day is what we call policy busting. And what that means is if you can identify a business policy currently deployed in the organization that's not working, challenge it, be ready to challenge it, but have the infrastructure to know what impact it will have if it changes, and assuming that the impact is acceptable, you need to change it rapidly. Unfortunately, many organizations simply can't do that today. These days, customers want it their way. They want it their way not only, as Roger pointed out, with processes and having a personal set of touch points that align with their need to take a journey with our products. But we also have a problem internally with managing the customization and the personalization of products. Very difficult for a lot of organizations to do that effectively at scale in a manageable way. Well, why is that so hard? What is it about our infrastructures today that make it very difficult to reconfigure our products in ways that meet emerging market needs and personalized customer needs? something we need to talk about. Our business processes are very unfriendly as well. You can ask customers about that. And the irony is a lot of times people on the outside of our organizations can see the problems even more clearly than we can on the inside. So I have a whole laundry list here. I won't go through all of them. I'll just point out the last two that I think are very frustrating, very difficult for customers to come to grips with. And that is, again, getting inconsistent results. You go to one branch of the bank, one street, get one result. You go down to another bank branch at another street, go in, you get a different answer. That's just not acceptable in the knowledge age, highly inconsistent. And even worse, we can't explain the results that we're getting. The why is sort of missing. So that brings me to a large challenge that I want you to be thinking about today and that I want to address, and I call it simply the why challenge. Why do we get the results that we get from our processes? Now, wouldn't it be nice, sort of imagine with me, that right on your laptop or on your desktop, in your office or wherever you're doing your digital work, that there was a button you could press, call it the why button. You could press it and find out why you got the results that you got from some business process. Why can't we do that? Why isn't the knowledge organized better that we can press the why button and get results? So the bottom line on all this, and this particular manager said it quite effectively in a meeting we had with them, and that is, I really want our staff, our workers, to be able to dream free about innovations and products and services and not be, and this is a key word, arbitrarily constrained by software methods, software methodologies, software release cycles. And ultimately, I think that's what business agility is all about, where we should be driving things.
Okay, the next topic area to address has to do with the solutions that the manifesto prescribes. So developing some observations about the solutions, I want to establish a context again. And I make the observation that manufacturing and engineering are completely two different things. And if you talk to somebody from the IT community and ask them what they do for a living, they tend to say, well, we build and run systems for a living, actually. And that is a manufacturing idea, basically, it's a manufacturing idea. And basically, they build systems. The systems is your enterprise, by the way. The system is the enterprise. Now, some people used to get upset with me when I would say the system is the enterprise. They said, oh, the system is not the enterprise. The system, supports the enterprise. I basically say, hey, wait a minute. For the last 60 or 70 years, you have been replacing the people of the enterprise with systems. What were those people doing? Weren't they the enterprise? If they weren't the enterprise, you shouldn't have bothered replacing them with systems. No, you made the system the enterprise. If there is any question in your mind whether the system is the enterprise or not, turn the system off for 15 or 20 minutes. The place will come to a screeching halt. They'll be all sitting on their hands waiting for the system to come. No, the system is the enterprise, which implies, by the way, that IT is engineering or is manufacturing your enterprise for you. And actually, because your enterprise was never designed, they actually are not manufacturing your enterprise for you. What they're doing is they're manufacturing parts of your enterprise. I'm one line behind here. The enterprise was never engineered, so therefore, it was never designed, so therefore they're manufacturing parts. And so the fundamental question is, after they get the parts manufactured, there may be lots of those parts, by the way. The question turns out to be, do the parts fit together? Okay, and the technical word for that, are the systems enterprise-wide integrated? That's the way we would say it. Are the systems that they have built enterprise-wide integrated? And the implication, what do you, if you were manufacturing airplanes or buildings or locomotives and you manufactured a bunch of parts and the parts don't fit together, what do you do with them? Hey, scrap and rework. Throw that stuff away because there's no way to fix that problem after the fact. Nobody necessarily wants to hear this, but the fact is that you can't fix that problem after the fact. If you want the parts to fit together, you have to engineer them to fit together before you manufacture them, basically. So just to repeat that statement, if you want the parts to fit together, you have to engineer them to fit together before you manufacture them. So there are engineering-derived characteristics of whatever the object is you're trying to create. The engineering-derived characteristics are flexibility, reusability, alignment, integration, interoperability, and so on and so on. Those are engineering-derived characteristics. You don't get those characteristics by manufacturing whatever the object is, of manufacturing the parts. You're not going to get those characteristics. I mean, we all tend to have a lot of an application portfolio, a lot of systems. Are they flexible? No. Are they reusable? No. Are they aligned? No. Are they integrated? No. Are they interoperable? No, 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 and no. They're not. The enterprise was never engineered, basically. So therefore, those characteristics are not manifest in the implementations. Now, in terms of manufacturing engineering, this is another quote. This comes from a speech that was made by Jay Forrester at the University of Seville a number of years ago, 1998, the speech, Designing the Future. I probably should say Jay Forrester managed a research project at MIT back in the 50s, and basically the end result of that was called industrial dynamics. If any of you guys ever got a PhD degree in systems analysis or systems, you took a course on industrial dynamics, and that was Jay Forrester. Here's the quote by Jay Forrester. Organizations built by committee and intuition perform no better than an airplane built by the same methods. As in bad airplane design, which no pilot can fly successfully, such badly designed corporations lie beyond the ability of real-life managers. Now, there's another quote from the same speech, which is that a manager runs an organization just as a pilot runs an airplane. Success of a pilot depends upon an aircraft designer who created a successful airplane. Who designed the corporation that a manager runs? In the basis, anybody designed it, or somebody designed it, or nobody designed it. Basically, typically it's not designed. So this comes from a quote from Fred Brooks. I had to resist the temptation. Fred Brooks managed 1,000 programmers from 1962 to 64 at IBM. They built OS, Operating System 360. The first operating system ran on different kinds of hardware. Some of you guys probably know better than I do. System 360, Model 20, 30, Model 40, 45, 50, 62, 70, 75, 80, 92, 90. They were all different hardware, same operating system. 1,000 programmers. I don't know how he did it actually, but anyway, he wrote, as a result of that project, he wrote a seminal piece of work, The Mythical Man Month. In any case, it's fairly well known, and I'm not sure, I have to ask my friend Newt about, academically, I think this is still referred to. In fact, I reviewed some curriculum from Singapore universities, two Singapore universities, that the Mythical Man Month was required reading in there, and that was just fairly recently. But this is a quote from the article he wrote, There Are No Silver Bullets. The hardest single part of building a software system is deciding precisely what to build. No other part of the conceptual work is as difficult. No other part of the work so cripples the resultant system if done wrong. No other part is more difficult to rectify later. And here's a quote that Ron ran across from Frank Lloyd Wright, and Frank Lloyd Wright basically, and there's no date on it, he's attributed to Frank Lloyd Wright, but he said, you can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. It was a fairly useful quote. Here's another quote from Fred Brooks. This comes from The Mythical Man Month, the original book he wrote in 1975. All repairs tend to destroy the structure to increase the entropy and disorder of the system. Less and less effort is spent on fixing the original design flaws. More and more is spent fixing flaws introduced by earlier fixes. Although in principle the system is usable forever, the system has worn out as a base for progress. Furthermore, machines change, configurations change, user requirements change, and the system is not, in fact, usable forever. A brand new, from the ground up redesign is necessary. If you recognize what he is saying, scrap and rework, fundamentally. It's going to happen. Just to make an observation, this explains why you have Windows 1.x 1985, Windows 2.0 87, 3.0 1990, 3.1 NT 3.0 95, NT4 98, 2000 NP, XP, XP64, Vista 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know what they're up to. So I think we're up to about 10 now. In any case, is there any question in your mind about change? Hey, scrap and rework, any way you look at this. And by the way, I just make this observation, this also likely is the pattern in the enterprise. Every system in the enterprise, same pattern, fundamentally. Now, this is a quote from Ron Ross. This is in the one of the adjunct documents in the manifesto. I love this quote. Concept models, which address precision and disambiguation in business communication of all kinds, is the first priority. Business knowledge is exceedingly complex. Until you can express it precisely, you are doomed to a world of miscommunication and misinterpretation. A comprehensive, active, semantically rich business vocabulary is a must-have in the knowledge age. You can't expect customers and software developers to make up for what you can't communicate yourself precisely. I am going to, we'll talk more about this. There's a way to do this, okay? But that'll come up in some following material. In any case, the next one up is
Totally not ready yet. We have time left over. I'll take 30 seconds of John's time too. Again, so I'm coming at this from the perspective of the outside looking in, and that's all about am I receiving value as I expected? Because again, if I don't get that, I'm going to easily switch somewhere else where I will get that same value. And so the question is that once we start to look inside, how are we going to configure all of that? And I'm contending that the organization chart, as I mentioned before, is probably one of the worst things ever invented in terms of organizing and decomposing and structuring and allocating work out to people. And so when we do this, the kind of work we have to do, if we just take a part of the organization and we sort of engineer that part of it, we know it's not going to fit with the rest of the organization. But we tend to do this all the time. So much of the work we get, so much of the stuff in the portfolio comes from individual managers and individual departments who request initiatives and projects and solutions which suit their purpose. But do they fit together? Do they make sense? Are they sharing information across the whole organization and across the whole value chain? So we have to take a different perspective. And so this is why we would argue that a value chain perspective is really what we need to have. So maybe I should explain what we mean by value chain. A value chain is not just a process. A value chain is all the work you do and all the knowledge you need in order to do that work to satisfy the expectations of a market. So a great example of this is in banking. Typically you see banks who have wealth management, they have small business management, they have basically consumer banking capabilities. And so basically what they're doing is they actually have these particular markets, but they still manage it by organization chart, and you talk to people in different parts of the organization. So what we're saying here is that a market needs to be served by a set of capabilities and a set of processes, a set of activities, and all the knowledge you need to know about your rules and policies and information, that needs to be tied together and connected end to end. The organization chart is just something that changes a lot, but we shouldn't have to rip apart our building and designing of capabilities because the organization chart has changed. Matter of fact, that's one of the good tests of agility. If I reorganize, will everything still work the same way? Will we still get the same results? Will we still make the design choices the same way? Because that's the right thing for the market that we're serving. Of course, within that value chain, there's a whole bunch of work that needs to get done, a bunch of processes that have to be executed, and a bunch of other rules that way. Now, what that also says here, That's nice if you've got one value chain in the organization. For example, if I take an organization like Michelin, Michelin makes tires, right? But they also produce restaurant guides and hotel guides. I'm sure they don't work in the same building. At least I hope they're not making the same design decisions because they serve in different markets. It's in the same corporation, but you have to filter out the value that's being created for the markets that you're serving. Now, in many cases, what we're seeing today is that's really, really changing from the point of view of the actual value chain doesn't just sit inside your organization. It crosses multiple organizations. So if you think of things like Uber, or you think of things like Airbnb, what you're going to find is that those services which serve a particular market are delivered by multiple organizations. And the only way it works is if every single one of those organizations has the same motivation, the same target, the same results, and everything they do fits together. Even though they're separate legal entities and they all have their own profit motive, but basically they're all working together in the best way to serve the market. And this is what we're starting to see. Organizations, multiple organizations working together to create one set of value for a particular marketplace. That makes it even tougher. So when we talk about the architectural challenge, now I have to architect across organizations and share knowledge across organizations and move information across organizations and have processes that connect across organizations. So that's really going to be the challenge for us. So, but people are doing it. And the ones who are being successful right now are actually perhaps not actually investing in their own capital, they're using somebody else's capital. That's the whole thing with Uber. It's somebody else's car. Airbnb is somebody else's hotel room. It's not yours, and yet you're basically coordinating and connecting all the dots together. So this value chain orientation is absolutely essential because customers will not tolerate anything less. So one of the great examples of what I just talked about is this organization over here. This is an organization that we work with called British Columbia Transit. British Columbia is where I live in Vancouver, and we've worked for British Columbia Transit. They operate the transit system for the whole province, with some areas carved out a little bit, but basically they're responsible for the whole thing. And they basically called us and said, we've just got approval for $40 million technology spend, because we're so far behind on our technology. $40 million technology spend. And so we said, well, that's really nice, but what are you going to spend it on? We said, well, we don't know yet, we need help. But we got the money, which is sort of important. And then, so what we did, we went in and looked at it and said, well, where's your strategy? Where are you trying to go? What are your drivers? What's the motivation? How will you know when you've been successful? And so they said, well, we're really not sure, but we know there's a lot of complaints from all the bus riders. And worse than that is the people who weren't riding the bus were not complaining. So the question is, what's our market? Is our market to get people, our purpose to get people out of their cars to take transit so we relieve the pressure on going to work every single day? So we had a lot of discussions about vision and mission and things such as that. But then we quickly turned it back and said, well, what is success? We said, well, we have to raise the ridership in transit. So okay, right, how are we going to figure this out? So we defined a bunch of workshops, and we said, hang on a second. You're the transit corporation, right? You're the transit corporation. One of the things you do is you design fare products. In other words, how am I going to pay for transit? But do you operate the buses? Well, no. Do you determine the schedules? No. Do you determine the routes? No. Do you put out information about how all this comes together? No. Municipality decides where the bus stop's going to go and the schedule. Local municipalities, 64 local municipalities have to do that. 53 bus companies actually get the contract for doing all of that. And people basically find their schedule through Google Transit. So, okay, now can we just fix you, the transit corporation? Do we have to deal with everybody else? Clearly we've got to deal with everybody else because the bus riders will be happy if the whole thing works from end to end. So this was the challenge. In order to do this, this took us about 6 months, but we had to pull together 120 people from all these municipalities, bus companies, scheduling, fair transit issues, as well as the corporation itself. We put them all together around workshops to figure out how did everything connect. And we didn't take it function by function. We did cross-functional meetings where everybody in it had knowledge about something else, and we pulled it all together that particular way. So it's an example of a cross-functional, end-to-end value chain with multiple organizations, and it's wildly successful. At the end of it, they came out with a $25 million business transformation initiative, as opposed to a $40 million IT spend. It's a really good example of how you have to put it all together. So to do this, though, you have to have access to that business knowledge, and that which means, as Ron mentioned before, those individuals had a lot of knowledge. We had to pull it together and get it formalized and documented and make it reusable. So that was one of the key things. So really what we're trying to do in all of this, in my opinion, by the way, this is a chart that the executives really love because it's real simple. What it really says is, when I start doing things, I spend money until I get to the point where it's ready to go and I can implement it. By the way, I'm going to be quite optimistic and say we actually get to this point. Because quite often we don't even get there, we scrap it. We scrap and rework before we even implement. And then I'm also going to be optimistic to say we get to a point where it was worth it. After that, I'm going to basically create value. So I've got a cost line, I've got a return line, I've got a time to market line, I've got a time in market line, because this is the other challenge we're seeing. This line here is rapidly going in this direction. In other words, we don't stay in market long enough. So this is the argument for a lot of the things we're talking about. I've got to be cheaper, I've got to be better, I've got to get there sooner. And the real value of this agility is if I can produce something I can adapt and adjust and keep in market longer, there's the real value rather than scrap and rework. And basically, I would always tell our executives, we have one job, more green on that page. That's it. And that's the language we have to speak to them that particular way. So what we try to do is we try to figure out, first of all, what's the North Star? Where are we trying to go? What do we, products and services and information, do we exchange with the world? What do people expect from what we're doing? And what's the nature of our interaction, the experience? A lot of people are talking about customer experience management now. And so we ask some really, really good questions about what is the right experience. And then we can, based upon all that, we can then make decisions about where are we going to invest. But we need to invest in business change. Investing in software alone is risky because all the other stuff might not be in support of that and will not give us enough return on investment. Scrap and rework, we talked about that. And optimizing for silos will always sub-optimize the end. Optimizing the parts will always sub-optimize the whole, always. Because we have different measures and different motivations. And so the change perspective has to be the value chain. It has to be value creation. We can do all this other stuff, but we're not creating value, we're not going to be around very long to sort of see the results of all of that. Value chain is a natural construct. This is the first point that's important. The value chain is a natural construct. The marketplace will tell us what the value chain is. The organization chart is temporal, it will change, and therefore we cannot build around it, otherwise we change everything every single time. This is important. The role and motivation of every stakeholder in the value chain, especially those ones in multiple organizations, has to be the ultimate value of the end customer, not just their own part of that. So everybody aligned on motivation, and of course, a knowledge of the dependencies. If I touch one thing, what else is in effect is absolutely essential in taking this stuff forward. So this perspective we think is critical, and we pull it all together that way. Over to Ron.
I want to talk to you about the knowledge aspect of this problem space. The knowledge that you need in order to run the business and the knowledge base that you need to create in order to be effective. And rather than just sort of throw it at you, let me tell you a story that I think will motivate why this is so important. I want to share with you one of the most intelligent things I've ever heard a manager say on the fly in a meeting. It's very impressive. I have to go into a little bit of the backstory to set it up. But what she said, I think, in one way or another is going to sound very familiar to all of you. So a few years ago, Gladys Lamb and I, Gladys is my business partner. Say hello, Gladys. She's up here timing us, if you don't know. And she has the evil eye when we go over. So this is why we're all so attentive to this clock that's sitting over there. Anyway, we were invited to a national tax authority in order to reverse engineer a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and to reverse engineer the business rules. It was a very complex spreadsheet. The manager told us everyone was deathly afraid to touch it because no one knew what implication it was going to have. You could never predict what a change might do. And the spreadsheet was mission critical. It was embedded in various of their systems and on their website and so on. Anyway, she was finally biting the bullet and assembling some of her best staff and bringing us in as external consultants to help re-engineer this spreadsheet. Now, this spreadsheet was so infamous in this organization that it had a nickname. Everyone called it Al's spreadsheet. So, if you, in your organization, have a spreadsheet that has a nickname, you may be in trouble. Anyway, this spreadsheet, Al's spreadsheet, was implemented under the first generation of automated spreadsheets way back in the last century. You know, one day I might, traveling around the world, and I've told this story many places around the world, I might hold a contest for the world's most complex spreadsheet. No, I better get a real life instead of doing something like that. I can't see that as fun. But anyway, the reaction a lot of audiences have is, no, this couldn't possibly have been the world's most complex spreadsheet because my organization has the world's most complex. Anyway, we worked on this for days, and you know, it was really hard going, trying to reverse engineer the intent and express the business rules and so on. And by midweek, we'd only made very limited progress. And so sometimes I'm known just to sort of pop up and say whatever's in my mind instead of filtering it before it comes out. So these guys sitting behind me provide some checks on that here. But anyway, so I said, and I thought this was brilliant, I said, why don't we just go ask Al what this spreadsheet does? Seemed reasonable, right? And everybody in the room burst into laughter. They thought that was hilarious. And you know, it went on for about 10 or 15 minutes. Meanwhile, I wanted to crawl under a table or under a chair or something. And finally, everybody calmed down enough to tell me that nobody actually knew who Al was. Nobody knew who he was. He apparently was someone who had worked there, you know, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and long since moved on to many other things. So nobody even knew who Al was. So that's when the manager said the thing that I found so memorable and so accurate, so right on point. What she said was, no organization should ever depend on absent brains. So when you think about knowledge and engineering knowledge base, thinking about those areas, that's really what our goal is, never depending on absent brains for day-to-day operational answers to questions that we all have. One of these days in your business, you will lose your Al. And you want to make sure that things don't come to a screeching halt when that happens. So today, the opportunity we're taking here, and we appreciate your time this morning coming and spending with us. I know your time is invaluable. So just standing back and looking at the big picture, what is it that you need in order to create a business or a business capability? What are the key ingredients? This is no big surprise to you, but first of all, you need people. And even though artificial intelligence and bots are going to change the nature of interaction with people and the way we work, you're always going to need people in one form or another. You're going to need processes, because without processes, nothing gets transformed, value doesn't get created, so obviously you're going to need processes. You're going to need information, and we've known that for many, many decades now. As John pointed out, my own career started in a database way back in the 70s, And today you have big data and all sorts of things, but it's just clear that information management is important. And of course you have technologies. I mean, we're in a machine age now, and all our organizations depend on digital devices of various kinds. But actually, as John has pointed out, the industrial age goes back several hundred years, so machines have been a key part of the revolutions that have happened over time. But there's a missing ingredient, and one that we haven't spent enough time on. It's a big question, it's a big open hole. And what is that missing ingredient? We think it's knowledge. And I think everyone intuitively has always known that knowledge is important to organizations. We've just never been in a position or had the requirements to engineer it more effectively. But now we're in the knowledge age, and we're on a journey to learn how to engineer the knowledge more effectively. And the winners are going to be the ones who do that and are able to do that. Now, knowledge can actually cover a lot of ground. We're very deep on knowledge here. I'll talk more about knowledge in just a second. But there's a related question I want to ask first, and that is, what is it, using knowledge, that makes your business smart? You know, what's the tip of the sword in applying knowledge in everyday activity? And I would identify, 4 aspects to what makes your business smart from a knowledge point of view. Obviously, it's your strategy, and that's key to success. But more fundamental are 2 ingredients: the business vocabulary that you use, cannot take that for granted, and business rules. You knew I would get to that eventually, probably. And also operational business decisions, which put business rules to work in a more complex way. Those are the 4 fundamental things that you need. So later on today, I'm going to talk in a little more detail about business rules. You probably would expect that. Let me see if I can just whet your appetite very quickly on that. Gladys and I, our organization, works with a major insurance company in the United States. And it's a world-class organization in terms of their IT support. They win many awards in terms of quality. And they're world-class in agile software development. But they also have a business rules initiative. It's a very progressive organization. And they've had enough experience with that. We've worked with them for many years to be able to give us some statistics about what it means in order to apply business rules in a very effective manner. And what the manager in the area told us is that they were able to document a 75% savings in projects by having business rules defined in advance and ready for the projects at the very start. Now that is a very significant number, because the likelihood of success of projects where you can save that amount of brain work is going to go sky high. And indeed, many of their projects are quite successful. But let's focus on the basics of knowledge engineering. An essential idea in the manifesto, which we all agreed to, we all came to on our own and then sort of coalesced around the idea, is that you need a knowledge base, a business knowledge base, a base of business knowledge in order to retain the knowledge and to be able to reuse, track, apply it more effectively. That knowledge must be explicit, not tacit. Tacit knowledge is when Al walks out the door with the knowledge. Explicit knowledge is when it's written in a form that you can readily access and reuse. Now, how should you think about a knowledge base? I don't want to make that sound mysterious. I tend to like to think of it as a knowledge companion, like your smartphone in many respects is a knowledge companion. This is more of a business-oriented device, like a personal assistant that can answer questions about fundamental aspects of the business architecture, the business engineering. And the nice thing about this digital assistant, this knowledge companion, that it never gets tired, you know, it doesn't have emotions. It can't give you attitude about your stupid questions that you might ask it. It just politely asks you to disambiguate and try to, ask a more intelligent question. It is a way of doing work, of retaining knowledge in a form that we can capture today, what we can reuse tomorrow. And that's where we fall down in knowledge management today, is that we don't do our work in such a way that the knowledge we create can be used for the future, in the future, directly and effectively. So why a business knowledge base? What are the reasons for that? I think we've enumerated a number of points today, but retaining business knowledge, retaining your owl, that's certainly important. Avoiding unintended side effects from change, as you know, is a recurring theme in what we're talking about. And also something that's on a lot of people's mind these days, if you talk about agile methodologies and so on, and that is the transparency of decision making. Now, a lot of agile methodologies think about transparency of decision making only in a matter of hours and days. And that's fairly easy because the project is still together and the people are face to face and they're having conversations. The harder part of transparency of decision making has a time span of months or years. Being able to go back and ask, why did someone set some policy in the way that they did? When did they do it? And maybe most importantly, why did they do it? And that gets right at the heart of corporate memory. You're going to hear me in my segments today come back over and over again talking about corporate memory and the need to be able to manage that more effectively. So let me be absolutely clear here in case there's any doubt in your mind. When I say business knowledge, I am not talking about software development knowledge. Okay? Everybody hear what I just said? That was important, so if you're dozing off, that's a good place to sort of perk up and listen. Business knowledge is not the same as software development knowledge. And a lot of IT people get very confused on that point. It's just not the same. It's not even close. So the techniques that we use today in this area are not at all effective. So today you will hear me talk about business rules, concept models, John has mentioned, and of course we'll get into policy busting. Those kinds of things are indispensable in this area. Another way to think about a knowledge base, a business knowledge base, is as a single source of truth that you can go to and you can trust the answers that you get back. Now when I say single source of truth, a lot of people think I'm talking about data or metadata, because traditionally that's sort of where we have used that term single source of truth. But I want you today to sort of imagine and step up to a new vision of the single source of truth, which has to do with business knowledge. The what you know and what you need to know in order to be able to do what you do in the business. Single source of business truth. Now who would that benefit? Well, it benefit a lot of audiences, and compliance is not the least. To me, the fact that compliance capability is not built in to our solutions is a major issue. And we throw lots of resources at compliance and we just don't answer the questions effectively. But there are lots of audiences for business knowledge. In fact, I think as we start to look at this more closely, we're going to discover that the usage of business knowledge, the potential uses, is beyond even today what our imagination is. Very exciting area to be involved with, very fundamental part of our thinking about business agility. I'll leave the last word here to Peter Drucker. He said it better than I could. Knowledge is infinitely more perishable than any other resource we've ever had. That's why you've got to manage it.
The next topic area that we want to address is the road ahead. And what we see, how do we see that, how that manifests itself. And I, once again, make some observations, contextualize this. There's nothing theoretical or technical that constrains or prohibits the realization of all the principles contained in the manifesto. Ron Ross and Roger Burlton and I have spent decades and decades and decades thinking about this. There is no technology that is required to do what we're talking about doing. There's nothing constraining. The only thing, people miss this idea here. All the business knowledge and all the principles don't need to be completed or in constant practice to continue operations to do new work. You don't have to have it all done. Every time I make a presentation, somebody hears me say, stop the music for 15 or 20 years and build out all this architecture stuff, and then you can start doing some actual work again. I never said that. Which one of you guys are the guys that heard me say it? No, I never said that. I said someday you're going to wish you had all that knowledge, in effect, transcribed. Okay, that's what I said. I didn't say when that was either, by the way. That may be utopia. You may never have it all. So basically, the implication is you can do this little by little, iteratively and incrementally. Okay, little by little. The thing that allows us to do this little by little is because those of us who do enterprise engineering and manufacturing, we don't have immediate transformation from the engineering descriptive representations to the instantiation. If you're building buildings or airplanes or locomotives or battleships, after you do the descriptive representations for describing the object you're going to try to create, you have to have immediate transformation. You have to transform whatever the descriptions are into wood or titanium or aluminum or composites or something. Have immediate transformation. The fact is, our descriptive representations are the same as the media of our instantiation. It's got to be either, documents or, transcribed on paper, or it's going to be digital kind of representation. So the media of the descriptive representations is the same as the media of our instantiation. That enables us to do this little by little, part by part, piece by piece over long periods of time. If you're building an airplane, you can start building the parts before you have the airplane completely designed. But when the scrap and rework costs exceed the profitability on the airplane, you stop, and you can't build any more parts until you get the final engineering design release. So they have a limit, okay? We don't have that limit. I'm basically saying this is very realistic. We don't have to do this all at one time. I never said stop the music for 15 or 20 years. And start, just do all the descriptive representations, and then you can do the implementation. I never said that. Okay, so in any case, once again, whoever quotes me on saying stop the music for 20 years, I'll come back and talk to you later. In any case, this can be defined or designed little by little. In effect, the only thing required to realize these principles is deciding to put them into practice and committing to iterative and incremental realization. That's the new knowledge age paradigm, by the way. That's a different concept. That's the knowledge, our argument is that be the knowledge age paradigm. Because there are no limitations, technically, somebody is going to do this. And I would observe that there are cultures in the world that are not intimidated by sitting down and rolling up their sleeves, if it takes however long it takes in order to make it happen. I mean, the Japanese decided they wanted to own manufacturing 35 or 40 years ago. I said, well, it's only going to take 35 or 40 years. Let's start working on it. They own it. Okay, so I'm just saying there are places in the world that people are not going to be intimidated by this, and they are going to do it. Best it'd be you. I'd just make that observation. You better, because if somebody else in your domain in your industry basically does this and you don't, by the way, they have the knowledge advantage, and they will make life really interesting for everybody else in the game. Okay, so I'm just making the observation. The thing that's holding us up is deciding to do it and then committing to making it happen, little by little, iteratively, incrementally, between now and forever. Roger, for you,
Thank you, John. I'll try to be fast on this part. I think that, again, I'm coming at this from the connecting the dots perspective, both from a knowledge point of view as well as making sure the work is progressing in the right way in terms of value creation. I do sort of this black box picture. Now if I look inside and look at the organizational structure, we do have organizational structures, even though I think that sometimes they're not the best ones to support the value creation. But one of the biggest things we've seen in all of this, the biggest challenges, is we are going to have to actually change the motivation of the individual executives. Over here, I've got somebody focused on sales, and they maybe get a bonus based upon the sales volume that happens. The other people here dealing with risk management. We were talking to the chief risk officer of one bank recently. He said the chief executive has asked me to reduce the risk. So I said I can do that. I can reduce the risk to 0. You just won't approve any mortgages. So you've got these different perspectives. I need to cut costs. I need to optimize cash. I need to limit new products. And the chief executive, I need to keep my job. But who? Oh, oops, okay, back again. This is a very not a great little tool. I'm not good at it, I should say. I think the issue here is that none of these executives has the motivation or the incentive to actually deal with customers getting the services they were promised. I mean, this is pretty simple until you get to the organizational structure where you have power and control and people driving towards inconsistent, conflicting types of challenges. So part of all of this is coming back to then, how do we start to think about the culture and the behavior of people, which is certainly affected by the formal incentives, but also the behavioral things as well. So when we implement any change, we put a work structure in place, which is all the things we've talked about so far. But we also have to bring people on the journey as well. So when we bring those people on the journey, we can then execute work, and then that work we need to put in place this whole issue of, can we observe what's happening? Can we monitor performance data? Can we actually see what's taking place? And if we then find a sort of a gap between what we see and what we're supposed to be seeing, analyze those deviations, and then we can go back and say, well, we have to update our design. Well, hopefully that's an easy change update, or not scrap and rework, right? That's really what we're looking for. But in addition to that, what we might find is the issue is not just the formal things we've designed and built out, it's also the actual behaviors of the people in the business. So we're going to have to do things like train and coach. So part of this whole business agility we're talking about has to be human agility as well. So that comes in as part of the picture. And just referring back to what John said a moment ago, that is that you don't have to be the world's most mature, the world's best at everything. If you're down here, you can do a little bit, move a little bit forward as you're going. So the question is, where are you today? Where do you want to be? A better question is, how far will you be allowed to go based upon the understanding and the permission of the executives of your organization? And I would contend that is probably the biggest obstacle we face right now, is we get it, but then a lot of the people who are going to have to go along with all this, they don't get it. They're driving towards different motivations. So that's a real challenge for us.
So clearly we need a vision for what we're trying to accomplish. We need a rethink of our ways of doing things, a fresh way. Hopefully we're sharing some of that today. We'll get more to it a little bit later. And yes, we are getting to a break, by the way, just in case you were nervous about that. But let me just finalize one or two words before we do that. At a recent BBC conference, the keynote speaker, Juliet Font, provided an important clue, I think, for what direction we ought to be going and how we ought to be thinking about that. What she explained was that these days, most of us don't work in widgets, manufacturing widgets anymore, manufacturing things. We manufacture, most of us, thoughts. In other words, we are actually working now in thought factories. And what we really don't know how to do at this point very effectively is to put thought manufacturing on the assembly line. So, knowledge, it's the solution to business agility is not about creating software faster. That's the wrong direction, that's the wrong approach. One of the reasons we produced the Business Agility Manifesto was to counter that sort of big trend in the industry. That is taking people in the wrong direction. In the knowledge age, the creation of capabilities and business solutions need to be seen as a means of knowledge capture and representation. In fact, you should start thinking about your organization in some ways as a knowledge machine. And the more effective that machine can work, the more effective you're going to be. You know, and I think that the drive chain and the gears of that value chain have to do with business vocabulary and business rules. That's what I'll be talking about after the break. In short, we need to put thought manufacturing on the assembly line. Manifesto has given us a vision for how to do that.